So welcome to this sixth session of the City of London Green City Briefings. I'm Heather Barrett-Mold. I'm the immediate past master of the Worshipful Company of Gardeners. And I also get involved in all sorts of different environmental organisations. For example, I'm the vice president of the Institution of Environmental Science. The City of London Green City Briefings are a series of 8 free of charge 1-hour webinars launched to address climate change topics that the City of London faces and that are relevant to cities worldwide. The briefings are the output of a very successful partnership between the Worshipful Company of Gardeners and the Association of International Producers of Horticulture. My thanks go to AIPH for making this possible. There's a time set for questions later, and questions will be taken from you, the audience, in writing using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And just a reminder that this and other briefing sessions are recorded and they're available for viewing on the AIPH website. Our first speaker today is Hilary Russell, who is the Lady Mayoress of the City of London. And I'm very pleased to introduce Hilary to you. Hilary has been so supportive of all sorts of initiatives to raise biodiversity within the City of London. Like me, she started out as a natural scientist. She's an ambassador for Bees for Development. She's a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Farmers. And as I say, she has championed work in the city aimed at increasing biodiversity. And in particular, an initiative which is running through the city, which is called Pollinating London Together, and aims to make the environment a lot more pollinator friendly. And I have to thank her for that. So I'm going to hand over now to Hilary Russell. Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you, Heather. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you all today. I would like to welcome you to the 6th in our series, as Heather said, of Green City Briefings. I would also like to thank AIPH and the Worshipful Company of Gardeners for once again hosting today's briefing. Today, we're focusing on the critical dynamics of city biodiversity and global conservation. This is something hugely important to the Lord Mayor and me. Often when people discuss what's happening to our planet, they focus on tackling climate change. While of course this is important, we should not let climate change overshadow biodiversity loss, which requires its own discussion and programme of work. In fact, nature-based solutions for climate change harness the power of nature to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time help us to adapt to the impact of climate change. Let me be clear about what I mean when I say biodiversity loss. I mean the range and quality of species that maintain a balanced environment, which is slowly being wiped out. Humans have altered about 3/4 of the Earth's surface, which squeezes wildlife and nature into ever smaller corners. Around 1 million animals and plant species are threatened with extinction, many within the next 10 years. There have been many pieces of work which have helped to restore some balance, including DEFRA's biodiversity net gain, where any development on land has to leave biodiversity in a better state than when it started. Work like this, that both restores species populations and habitats, as well as promoting their welfare, is crucial. Which is why here in the city, where we have just under 33 hectares of gardens, churchyards and other open spaces, we are working towards that end. Historically, these open spaces have been managed primarily for public enjoyment, but now under new management, they're becoming more sympathetic to promote biodiversity. Now people are more aware of the importance of biodiversity in these open spaces, and it has positively changed how they enjoy them. This is great work, but I know that we can go even further. When I think back on the last 2 years being a Lady Mayoress, one of the most interesting areas of work has been with the city bees and the wider discussions about pollinators in the city. I am a keen beekeeper, I have been for years, and I'm pleased that we've kept bees on the roof here at Mansion House. Though my work is about more than bees, it's about supporting all our natural pollinators and their contribution to our ecosystem. So it's not necessarily about filling the city with beekeepers, but encouraging an environment which supports all our pollinators. For example, many buildings in the city have artificial flowers in window boxes. And while they can brighten up a facade, they don't actually do anything for the city's ecosystem. Replacing them with real flowers and plants, as we did here at Mansion House, creates a habitat that can encourage pollinators of all kinds to visit the city. There are many fine examples of this work across the square mile. Over the past 2 years, I've been lucky enough to visit beehives on Nebula Roof, in the Bank of England garden, on the roof of Fidelity, just to name a few, and all of these companies have thriving gardens for the pollinators. I believe this work by city firms will make a huge positive difference to the city's biodiversity. And I want to encourage this work wherever I can, which is why I was so pleased to host the official launch of Pollinating London Together last month at the Mansion House. Its scope to regreen our city is a fantastic vision, one that I wholeheartedly endorse. It's dedicated to raising awareness of the importance of pollinators, biodiversity, creating the habitats in central London where pollinators can thrive, and ensuring these spaces can be enjoyed by everyone. This will make London not just a better place for our precious and essential pollinators, but a better place for all of us. That message, how we make this world a better place for animals and humans, is central to our discussions today. Once again, thank you to everyone who has organised this briefing. And I'll now hand over to Heather.
Thank you, Lady Mayoress. Thank you for coming and doing this today, but especially thank you for everything that you do through the city and beyond. We're now going to move on to an input by two people. So Dr. Mike Maunder is a leading expert in the fields of plant conservation and biodiversity. He's currently the Executive Director of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. Dr. Maunder, devoted to facilitating the development of the conservation field, and has made great contributions to research and education, as well as has developed and fostered many multidisciplinary and cross-border collaborations. He's been involved with a number of really major organizations in carrying out this work. But he co-authors and co-works with Russell Gault, and Russell is the head of Urban Alliance at the World Conservation Union, IUCN. So welcome to both of you, Mike, and to Russell.
Well, good morning, and delighted to be here. And really, Lady Mayoress, thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and particularly happy to be working with AIPH and the Worshipful Company of Gardeners. I'm going to be talking today with my colleague Russell Gault from the IUCN. Russell is the brains. I'm doing the warm-up action, and we will then move on to we'll talk about some examples of how nature coming back to cities allows cities to future-proof themselves against the worst of climate change, to bring back biodiversity, to combat extinctions, and to increase the health, the well-being, and, to be honest, the joy and delight of the citizens and the residents and the workers of those cities. So cities are an extraordinarily important part of the future of biodiversity on this planet, both as a place to restore biodiversity, but also because cities consume biodiversity. And each city has a global footprint that can be measured by its impacts on biodiversity. And we'd like to sort of throw that idea out that the City of London is the square mile, but its impact on global biodiversity is truly global. With the trading that goes on within the city, it impacts a huge range of ecosystems and societies across the planet. So with that caveat, I will spend about 10 minutes talking through some issues. Then I'll invite Russell to come in and talk about the work of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Horticulture is where I started off my life. I started off as a city gardener, as an apprentice doing city and guilds in horticulture. And because of that, and then I moved up is the wrong term. I moved outwards into science and conservation. So I speak with someone who has a passion for urban horticulture and urban gardening. And I speak as someone who has a passion for conservation and science. So I'm really hoping that we can blend both the critical dynamics of city biodiversity and global conservation. As I said, cities are super concentrated areas of human activity. They are what is now referred to as the urban biome, and that's because it's turning into a distinct ecosystem, both defined by the species that live within it, 99% humans, followed by cockroaches, rats, fried chicken, you name it, but also by the biotas, by the microbiota that's developing, by the unique weather we create within a city, and the interactions between these huge blocks of calcium called buildings that hold immense amounts of carbon dioxide and their relationship with the outside world. So we're going to quickly talk about the urban biome. To me, some of the most exciting developments in urban horticulture and urban design, looking at buffering cities against the worst that climate change and extinction will bring, and then looking at global footprints, and then Russell will talk about the Urban Nature Index. So cities are where we should, as humanity, thrive and enjoy rewarding lives, and that's how they work. They are extraordinary magnets for human ingenuity and talent. But the green and blue spaces within these cities make so much difference to the quality of the social and health infrastructure of the city. And yet at the same time, cities consume, exclude, and extinguish, exclude and extinguish biodiversity. But what is extraordinary is we're seeing an evolution towards biophilic cities, where there may be green space, but it's often sterile and maybe managed so to be inoffensive, where we need to be moving towards an ecology that has a long-term vision and encompasses the wild, the spontaneous, and the regenerative. As a horticulturist, as an apprentice, spontaneity was beaten out of me. I remember being tested on planting bedding plants on the Brighton seaside and making sure that every lobelia I put in for the summer was at least 20 centimeters distance and totally squared. So things have changed. First law of ecology, everything is related to everything. And even in an extraordinary concentrated city like Hong Kong, you've got people there who are connected by the ecology of the city, by the vulnerability of that city to disease, by the vulnerability of the food chains that feed the city, and the vulnerability they face as urban heat islands depend or as flooding increases. And we know that cities account for 60 to 80% of the world's energy consumption and 80% of anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. And that's both in the everyday business, the metabolism of the cities, but particularly in the construction of cities. The cost of cement in environmental terms is enormous. And while cities are heading to 75% of the world population, they're only really 2% of our land area. And their demand for resources and the disruption of ecosystems extends to virtually every corner of the globe. And they're expanding. This is Sao Paulo in Brazil, and this is where the city smacks against one of the most endangered rainforest habitats on the planet, the Mata Atlantica, the South Brazilian coastal rainforest, which is a high endemism habitat, 3–4% of it left. And here's the city, cheek by jowl. And we're seeing cities increasingly nudging up, pushing into and chewing at the edges of extraordinary areas of biodiversity. You can think about it with the Miami and the Everglades. You can think about it with Nairobi and Nairobi National Park, which is turning into Africa's equivalent of Richmond Park or Epping Forest. And we're seeing it also in London. If you were to take the UK's conservation priorities, you'd include chalk streams. They really are limited to the UK and a little bit of northern France. And what could be termed the world's greatest chalk stream is the River Thames. So this is where biodiversity is being converted into urban landscape, and the result can be extinction of species and modifications of water runoff and flooding, heat dynamics, etc. And this is something that is a real existential threat to some cities. So the Lady Mayoress talked about extinction. We are accelerating extinction at the moment, and cities can be a refuge for threatened species and a refuge for biodiversity as a whole. And our view is biodiversity, if you're going to bring it back, be bold. One of the most cost-effective ways of bringing biodiversity back and linking through with flood control damages is bring the rivers back. 4 years ago, I was working with colleagues in Seoul in South Korea, and the mayor at the time, one of his agendas was to bring back the salmon to Seoul in South Korea. And look at what you can bring back, the lost and the extinct. Increase the areas of wild gardens and landscapes. And I think the Lady Mayoress hit the nail on the head. This is where we perhaps have to wean ourselves off the focus on ornament and look at both ornament and ecosystem services. How can we use these wild areas, these landscapes, to boost biodiversity? Last couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation about what KPIs we would use for informal landscapes within Cambridge and within the university. And one of them actually is the tonnage of aphids that every landscape produces to kickstart that trophic pyramid to bring back the birds. So I love the idea of horticulturists encouraging the biomass of aphids and other insects. Urban wetlands and sponge landscapes, increasingly key as we face a future of flood and drought. And they can be carbon landscapes that can help mop up carbon. And I think there's an opportunity for cities to use the regeneration of biodiversity to create an identity and to create the need and the acceptance of a long-term approach to society and ecology. The metabolism of many cities has accelerated since the Second World War to a dizzying extent. And the rebuilding, each time we rebuild, we demolish, we rebuild again. We're releasing huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, and we're losing opportunities for long-term slow growth of nature. And we need, as Ian McHarg says, we need nature as much in the city as we do in the country. And as a horticulturist and gardener, I am delighted by the technology of greening cities. It is extraordinary. But we have to watch. Are we looking at creating horticultural spectacles, or are we actually creating new ecosystems with a future that aren't going to get ripped out every season or every 2 years? They're going to take time to diversify, to hold significant amounts of carbon, to allow the fungal and microbiomes to expand and develop within the landscapes. At the moment, I'm seeing a lot of attention on these grand, dramatic performance pieces of urban landscaping, but they're ephemeral. We need to actually look at the long term of these developments and make sure they deliver ecosystem services and deliver biodiversity gain. And there's some really neat, if not somewhat wacky approaches. So this is one of my favorite buildings that is yet to be built. This is the Monarch Sanctuary in New York City by Terraform Studios, working office block, but it is designed as a New York City habitat for migrating monarch butterflies. And their practice, Terraform Studios, talk about having multi-species clients. So they've gone beyond window boxes, they've gone beyond plastic plants. KPI for this is how many more butterflies will there be in New York City? And I grew up as a parks apprentice where the lawn was a sacred duty. You were taught to mow and get the spacing right, put the stripes in. Now we know the lawn is monoculture. It soaks up pesticides, fungicides, nitrates, absorbs every ounce of water you can throw at it, and is in fact a negative biodiversity investment. How can we change lawns to wildflower meadows to more exciting and useful landscapes, given that there is no better substrate for picnics, and if you want to throw the frisbee for the dog, you really do need a lawn. So let's keep the lawns where they're needed, but supplement that with wilder turf, with wilder grass. And it doesn't always have to be grass. This is in Everton, in Liverpool, and these are the Everton wildflower fields, one of the most joyous landscapes I've ever visited. All native species, wonderful flocks of swifts and swallows and house martins feeding on the biomass of aphids released from these landscapes. The community's proud of them. They have events to sow the seed. They have events marking particular flowering seasons. They have events to harvest the seed. And I think this is part of the optimism. This is part of the looking at the future of the landscape of a city. And it is fundamentally joyous and full of aphids. What could be better? And I think there's nowhere quite like the City of London as a place of drama. You get a sense of the buzz of business and people, and wildlife and nature is part of that drama. In Cambridge, I'll pass tourists who have stopped in their tracks watching peregrine falcons fly over the streets. In parts of London, people love the ringneck parakeets, controversial bird, but people love them. In America, you go to Austin in Texas, and it's migrating butterflies and bats. In Miami, it was a celebration of the migrating sharks going off South Beach every year, heading to the north. Wildlife punctuates the air. It provides part of the rhythm for the metabolism of the city. This is one of my favorite projects, the Cheongyecheon River Restoration Project in South Korea. This was a nasty, industrial, high-density road. There was an old canalized anaerobic river, and the city authorities have brought it back to life with huge success, both as a loved landscape, as a valued destination, and as a piece of humming wildlife in the center of a busy city. So if we look at future-proofing cities, we're going to be faced with a future where we're going to be seeing the extremes. And perhaps one of the most dangerous of these extremes are these slow-moving, very wet storms that can inundate areas. And this is where the hinterland of the city is vital. It's what's happening on the watershed 10, 20, 30, perhaps even 100 miles away that will dictate in large part whether your city floods. And the floods of Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium this summer showed us that cities are extremely vulnerable to these catastrophic rainstorms. And there is an urgent need to look after the watershed that surrounds you, using nature-based solutions so that water moves more slowly through the landscapes, and building water, wetland habitats, the sponge city approach that Berlin is using to great effect to soak up water internally within the city. We see this as a great opportunity for bringing more recreation, more nature into the city and its hinterlands, and at the same time, improving wetland habitats and forested areas that release water slowly. City of London is about business. It's a global hub for business. And David Attenborough has this quote, finite environment, the planet, infinite growth in an infinite environment is just not possible. You're either a madman or economist, or possibly both. The City of London, as with every major conurbation around the world, has a hinterland of landscapes that feed it, fuel it, and drive it forward. And it's very important, if you're going to be a biophilic city and a city that wants to change the world, that both the daily consumption of a city and the particular business of a city is looked at, so that you move from being a consuming city to being a regenerative city whose relationships are felt in those landscapes that support the city. If you take any, let's take coffee. Coffee is traded, coffee is consumed. Coffee is produced in increasingly vulnerable landscapes in Vietnam, in East Africa, South America, and Central America. And in many cases, there's a real concern that erosion is taking place, land use is changing, and that the sustainability of that coffee is subject to question. Similarly, look at the vast increase in avocados in the Western world over the last decade, and that's directly linked to deforestation in places like Mexico, or the exhaustion of water supplies in other parts of the world. So I would argue there's a particularly rich opportunity for the City of London as a global hub for business to develop a regenerative relationship with those landscapes that feed it. So just to summarize before I hand over to Russell, to be a biophilic city is welcoming dynamic and diverse nature back into your city. It's integrating architecture and landscape design with a long-term vision. And also, I should add, it's a place where we're going to need to produce a new cadre of professionals who can manage biodiversity in cities, who have an eye for the decorative, an eye for the vital, understand ecosystem services, and create landscapes that delight and charm. There is a feeling that a green landscape is a bit of a wasteland. It's not. It should be a place of immense joy and spiritual regeneration. We talked about the need for a regenerative relationship with the global supply landscapes that every single city has. But I'd like you to leave you with this thought, that welcoming nature back is about health, joy, and delight back into the urban landscape. And I think the Lady Mayoress, with her reference to her bees, has already shown that to be absolutely the case. So I'm now going to hand over to Russell. I'm going to mute myself so you can hear Russell. And Russell, tell me when you want me to advance the slides.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I hope you can all hear me clearly. So firstly, Lady Mayoress, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to address you today on behalf of IUCN. And thank you to the organizers, the City of London and AIPH. It's a great pleasure to be here. So as Mike clearly articulated, cities have the profound potential to either exacerbate or ameliorate the global climate and ecological emergency. And we at IUCN have come to realize that we cannot possibly achieve our vision of a just world that values and conserves nature without the full and active cooperation of cities. Our vision literally hinges on forms and patterns of urbanization. So that's why we're doubling down on urban development. And this is evidenced by the establishment of the Urban Alliance. Next slide, please. The Urban Alliance, which is a broad coalition of IUCN constituents, members, commissions, national committees concerned with urban dimensions of nature conservation and concertedly striving to bring cities back into balance with nature. But also we've established the Urban Initiative. This is a new team within our global headquarters dedicated to solving urban challenges. We've also mobilized hundreds of case studies via the Panorama Solutions portal to inspire and hopefully educate people around the world to emulate best practice. And we've also created a new membership category specifically for cities and regions, welcoming them into the heart of the conservation community. Now, next slide, please. There's an old adage that what gets measured gets done, more or less. Now, one of the first tasks that we have set ourselves is to develop this new knowledge product for measuring urban ecological performance. We call it the Urban Nature Index. So this comprises a set of some 30 indicators nested across 6 themes, and it's intended to help cities understand their impacts on nature, set science-based targets for improvement, and monitor progress accordingly. So by enhancing environmental transparency and accountability, and by facilitating goal setting, we hope that this new knowledge product will catalyze local action for conservation. It's been financed, I should add, by Arcadia, a charitable fund of Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. And technical support has been provided by some 30 experts drawn from across our membership, as well as a team of dedicated consultants from Urban Biodiversity Hub. We also developed it in consultation with some 30 local governments, of which I think 6 of them piloted the Urban Nature Index, providing valuable feedback. I must pay tribute to them. So Curitiba, Lagos, Mexico City, Paris, Saanich, and Singapore. Now, next slide, please. The Urban Nature Index can be differentiated from other sustainability indices, and there are many, by its unique scope and framing. So we recognize that the ecological impacts of cities extend far beyond their boundaries. Mike conveyed that very clearly. So the scope of the Urban Nature Index is intentionally broad. It encompasses the urban, bioregional, and global spheres of impact, as depicted on the right-hand model. But we also recognize that cities are dynamic and complex systems. And so we have used the driver pressure state impact response framework to help us identify and address the root causes of ecological problems in cities. Next slide, please. So here you can see the Urban Nature Index. This is a very crude summary. There's much more detail, and we are in the process of building a new digital platform, part of the broader IUCN Contributions for Nature platform. And we would encourage cities to work with us. We are ready and eager to provide technical assistance to help cities implement this holistic sustainability framework and hopefully do more and do it better for nature. I should also just add that recently we held our World Conservation Congress in Marseille, France, and our members, comprising 1,400 governments and civil society organizations, they voted to adopt the Marseille Manifesto, a bold plan of action for bringing nature into recovery. And one of the key commitments there is to enhance universal urban biodiversity, but also access to green space, and to ensure that progress is measured using the Urban Nature Index. And we're targeting 100 cities by 2025. So we would be delighted if the City of London would like to work with us, and we're ready to provide support. Thank you once again. And if anyone has any questions, I would be delighted to answer them. And thank you, Mike, for inviting me to join you in this double act.
Thank you both so much. That Urban Nature Index is absolutely fascinating, and we definitely need to look into that more closely. And one of the things that Mike mentioned was the financial aspect of all of this. So we're conscious of the need to understand the costs of losing biodiversity and our impact on that directly or indirectly. I think the City of London has got a number of initiatives running to support green finance, but you know, as ever, more and more needs to be done, doesn't it? So yes, if anybody has any questions, and I know I've got one, but if anybody has any questions, do put them in the Q&A and we'll pick them up as soon as Marina has spoken. But thank you so much, both of you. Really interesting talk, thanks. And I'll be getting back to you both with all of my questions. Thank you. So next we have Marina Ruta. She is the lead of the Biodiversities by 2030 initiative by the World Economic Forum. Marina is passionate about innovation and initiatives fostering environmental sustainability. She has over 15 years experience with academia, industry, and the non-profit sector, and through her highly diversified and international career, she managed projects for technology innovation, business and partnership development, and she previously worked at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. I think probably there's a string more of things that I could be saying about Marina, but I'm going to pass directly over to Marina. Thank you ever so much.
I hope everyone can see me and hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today with you and with such knowledgeable and passionate speakers that preceded me. I thank you both, the AIPH and the Company of Gardeners, for your kind invitation today. Please let me start by giving you some known hard facts about our global future. One, between now and 2050, our planet will welcome an additional 3 billion people, and nearly 70% of this global population will live in cities, as we know. Two, the built environment has already expanded its footprint by 66% in the first 12 years of this century. Our cities today consume 40% of global energy and emits nearly 3/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, which is the main cause of climate change as we know it. This brings us far from sustainable and regenerative way of living, as Mark was saying before. Just now, also, Lady Mayoress reminded us that globally, nearly 1 million species are at risk of extinction. Well, urban expansion is responsible for almost a third of it. The good news, it is also a fact that cities are today evolving faster than in any point in history. And we see it as an opportunity for us to rethink our relationship as humans to the built environment and basically to nature at large. The current crisis presents an unprecedented opportunity to change the way we eat, we grow, we build and power our lives to achieve a carbon neutral and nature positive economy, and therefore halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. Indeed, to meet the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement, and I'm thinking here to the Conference of Parties that is gathering soon in Glasgow, we need to step up investment in cities, and we need to scale up efforts in maintaining their ecological balance and integrity. We also should enhance the urban governance capabilities of all stakeholders and drive innovation on how cities are planned, invested, developed, and managed, like Mike also reminded us before. What if we changed to the perspective that built environment can provide services, not just to the humans, but to the broader ecosystems too? The World Economic Forum New Nature Economy report that we issued last year showed that a nature positive pathway for the built environment could unlock up to $3 trillion in business opportunities and more than 100 million jobs by 2030. Great opportunity. Therefore, cities can operate in harmony with nature, fulfilling their potential of engines of sustainable economic development, resilience, and well-being for their citizens. By doing so, we can take nature as a model, but also as a mentor and a measure for what we're doing. I'm a big fan of the biomimicry movement that is exactly saying this. And we can ask ourselves not what we can extract from nature, but what we can learn from it and how we can truly feel interconnected, taking, but also giving to create life-sustaining value. Indeed, it has been shown that conserving, restoring, and amplifying biodiverse habitats in urban spaces can improve resilience to environmental and social threats by providing multiple benefits. Experts like Mike call this nature multifunctionality. Let me give you some examples, some already touched briefly. Green and biodiverse areas in cities help reduce, for example, air pollution, filtering dust particles, but also at the same time can help to control temperatures, therefore reducing the heat islands effect and heat waves, which just this year caused many deaths around the world, from Canada to Greece, to name a few examples. Introducing green corridors and preserving natural spaces in Medellin one of the biggest cities in Colombia, led to a reduction of temperature, proved a reduction of temperature and heat island effects of 2 degrees Celsius, which is a great number to achieve. Nature-based solution, if put at the core of human development and design, can definitely help tackle climate change-related risks in cities, such as also flooding and rising sea levels. In July of this year, devastating floods in Zhengzhou, China, killed more than 30 people and displaced almost 1.5 million people of residents of the city. How events like this can be avoided? The events cannot be avoided, but the renowned Chinese architect Conjun Liu would say, not working against nature, but with nature. Mike also spoke about the concept that was pioneered by Conjun Liu, the concept of sponge cities. Rather than using concrete to channel away rainwater, sponge cities are designed in terrace parks for residents to enjoy and for vegetation and wildlife to thrive. But during the rainy season, the terraces can flood, protecting the city without the need for walls or dikes. Very ingenious. Now, conscious of these many opportunities, I name just a few. And in partnership with the government of Colombia, which is the second most mega diverse country in the world, the president is championing this initiative. We at the forum started this year a multi-stakeholder initiative with the vision of accelerating the transition of cities across the globe towards a nature-positive model by 2030. A model that is enriching the resilience of cities and societies, enhancing the resilience of cities and societies to halt and reverse nature and its biodiversity loss. The initiative is suggestively called BiodiverCities by 2030, with a C and not with an S. This initiative convenes a multi-stakeholder group of experts advising on a shared global framework for biodiversity. This group of experts is led by 2 distinguished co-chairs, Dr. Lina Chan, director at the Singapore National Parks Board, and Mauricio Dorodas, a great practitioner, former mayor of Quito in Ecuador. The framework that we are developing is not only making the case on why this transition is needed, but also on what are the pathways for this transition to be implemented, showing that nature-positive economy in cities isn't just a good idea, but it's really a matter of human survival. At this purpose, we will be launching a public report outlining the framework in January 2022. And furthermore, in 1 week time, we are about to launch an innovation challenge on our digital platform, really a global call for innovative solutions that help cities become nature positive. We envision that cities of the future operate in harmony with nature in 3 ways. First, by reversing their negative impact on it. Russell talked about the broader impact of cities on biodiversity, not just in cities, but in the surrounding areas. And increasing investment in nature, in urban nature in particular. Second, by making the urban environment more hospitable to nature and its biodiversity. And third, by transforming the relationship, of course, of cities with their surrounding areas. So the Urban Biodiversity Index is going to be a great tool for the implementation of this vision. Biodiversity is a city committing to embed biodiversity in the built environment, heal these urban-rural interlinkages, make nature a competitive advantage in the processes and in the urban agenda, embrace the multi-stakeholder governance of its urban nature, and promote a citizen new mindset through urban nature. Indeed, governments do not have the sole responsibility to conserve and restore urban biodiversity. Grassroots movements and multi-stakeholder partnership can pave the way. And we see it, just to name a couple of examples, like Gardens in the Bay in Singapore, which is an horticulture and garden artistry, which was developed according to the feedback from visitors on a public exhibition of the master plan design competition. So really like the engagement of everyone and what a city could transform into. Or also the movement and community of London National Park City, and is particularly relevant here, which is working with residents, visitors, and non-governmental partners to make the city greener, healthier, and wilder. Local governments more and more engage with other urban actors, citizens included, to bring nature into the urban agenda. Just in short, Biodiversity by 2030 is now providing a platform for bringing together businesses, local and national governments, civil society, academics, innovators, and youth to develop, showcase, and scale those nature-positive transitions for cities to embed nature in economic decision-making. When I received the invitation to be here with you today, I've announced that our city is able to contribute to global conservation. I strongly believe that Biodiversities can, and I'm really glad to be part of this moment with all of you today. So thank you, and I remain available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Marina, that's some of that really rings true in the work that we've been trying to do in the City of London with things like, the value of green corridors and using nature-based solutions. In particular, I've been working on this project called Pollinating London Together, which is about trying to make sure that the environment in the city is pollinator friendly. But of course, we need to make sure that these pollinators don't get isolated into islands and can't move. And of course, they don't recognize those political boundaries. So you can see them sort of hitting, you get them through the City of London and then they might hit something else. So we need to make sure that there are truly green corridors running throughout the whole of London. But thanks so much. And that's fascinating hearing about the Biodiversity 2030. Thanks very much. I keep losing my being. Yes. So one is we clearly can and will respond to the current and growing crisis, but how is it sustained? That is the response, not the crisis. What role is there for local communities, residents, and educators? Anybody want to pick this one up?
I can give it a shot.
Thank you.
I think there is an extraordinarily important role for local communities, residents, and educators. The fields of wildflowers that I showed you from Everton, that is driven by a local community. That's their project. Yeah. And they developed that in collaboration with the local council, and they are the dynamic that keeps that project alive. So I think one of the things we have to work on is making sure that communities, local groups are thoroughly welcomed into these discussions, that we break down this view that conservation is someone else's issue, and we emphasize the fact that rebuilding nature is great fun. And it could be anything from doing a big wildflower meadow like the one you saw at Everton or similar to the ones at the Olympic Park, through to having a beehive on your allotment or turning your garden organic, or following the recommendations of the Royal Horticultural Society on bringing back nature into every domestic garden. And it's key to children's education. The recent discussion on the new GCSE on nature couldn't be more timely. So yes, bring in the local communities, residents, and educators. No one can do this by themselves. We need everyone, and everyone's going to enjoy it.
There's so much awareness raising to be done, isn't there? We had some fabulous planting in the City of London by St. Paul's, And so I went back to the city of, so it was really good for pollinators. It was very much like the planting that you showed in Everton. And I went back to the City of London, to the person who was responsible for all of this. And I said, oh, I really love that planting that you've got by St. Paul's there. It's so good. And he said, yeah, people either love it or hate it.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult, isn't it, to break that barrier through the people that hate it. And all of those nature-based solutions are all actually quite difficult to put in place because there are quite a few people who don't understand the reasoning behind it. And so we have to continue to do that awareness raising, and absolutely, as you say, starting in the schools, but then continuing it through informal education
There's a
with everybody.
very good trick for getting over that sort of, you know, the fear that some of it's going to be scruffy. Just call it performance art.
Yeah. Okay. So there is another question here, and that is, local authorities manage the majority of green space in London, but have reduced resources, both financial and skills. Also, there's no statutory duty to manage green space. How can we manage that? Actually, I'll tie in my question to this as well. So in the City of London, quite a lot of work has happened over planning requirements, and the requirements are quite good in demanding of green space. But it comes back to the thing that you were saying about what we don't need is a spectacle, a horticultural spectacle, I think you called it, which is not going to be long-lived. How do we do this, and with the local authorities who have that challenge all the time?
I can quickly respond to that, and I think Russell and Marina will have further comments on this. I think we do need horticultural spectacles, but we need horticultural spectacles with ecological impact and ecological delivery.
Yeah.
And that is part of planning. You know, some horticultural things are totally glorious, and everyone loves hanging baskets in a pub, but they're not a biodiversity investment as yet. And similarly, some of these spectacular horticultural installations we're seeing with green walls are not contributing to the biodiversity of the city as much as they could. They're using a small repertoire of pretty neutral plants.
Yeah.
What we need to do is broaden that and plant as if we intend that planting to be there in the next 20, 30 years. So there's allowance for ecological succession and maturation of the ecosystem. And that comes down to landscape architects, all of whom I've met are deeply committed to rebuilding biodiversity.
Yeah.
But that's a challenge for the landscape architects and the designers to give us those spectacular landscapes, but ones that deliver nature and ecosystem services, as Marina was saying.
Yeah. Russell, Marina, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, nothing like, as you know, I'm not really an expert, but I am constantly in contact with our Global Commission of Experts, and the question that has been raised in the chat about the financial resources is basically we discuss about it in most of the virtual meetings, especially because what we are trying to achieve, also the World Economic Forum is really looking at the economic angle while acknowledging that the value of nature is not just in economical terms. There are several values that we can attach to nature, but in terms of understanding and proving what is the economic case, when city officials, for example, stay with the pot of money and we know that they have restricted financial capabilities, try to prove that investing in nature in cities is a good return on investment. Put it in this way.
Yeah.
So we cannot grow the pot of money that are available, and since we're taking really a global approach, we have also to acknowledge that there are really like differences and context specific cases. But what we can do is really provide the basis for raising nature on the urban agenda and therefore unlocking the money that is needed.
Yeah, it absolutely has to be a good investment, doesn't it? Yeah, thank you. Russell, did you want to?
Yes, I mean, of course, I concur with much of what the previous speakers have said. I would just add that, yes, it offers a great return on investment, but we should ask local authorities, can they afford not to have high quality green space? Can they actually afford to deprive people of their, or to deny them their right to nature? And this actually dovetails into another approach or angle of attack, which is human rights. Just recently, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution. They are recognizing, most of the world's nation states recognize that every individual has a fundamental human right to inhabit a clean, safe, and sustainable environment. And I would add wildlife rich to that. So if you're not getting that right, if you're not realizing it, you are being penalized. And I think we need to start really holding the feet of planners and architects and designers to the fire to ensure that they deliver what is, you know, obliged of them or required of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's no better time than now when people have really valued the green space around them and realised just how important that is to them, isn't it? So I can't thank you enough, all of you. I really love this format. We're able to have an international audience. We're able to draw on such experts as all of you from around the world. And I really, really appreciate your contribution to this. And the audience obviously is as well, because the comments are coming up and they're nice comments. So thank you so much, everybody. I look forward to welcoming you all to the 7th session of on the 9th of November. It considers air quality in cities, discussing the realistic and real benefits of plants and how science informs policy. So this conversation continued. Thank you to those who've answered the poll. We'll share the results with you at the next session in November. So thank you all so much and goodbye. Hope to see you in November. Bye.